Well, good morning and thank you. It's always exciting to talk to a computer screen, isn't it? What we were wanting to do this morning, I think we have 5 people that have signed in. There might be a few others that scraggle in. But one of the benefits of webinars is sort of their anonymity. So we can kind of share some things if we want, and we can also benefit from the wisdom of the group. So just by way of introduction, I'm a small business owner. My purpose and passion is helping successful entrepreneurial families to connect or align their wealth to their purpose. And part of our process in doing that is looking at managing, protecting, and transferring family and business wealth. So 99% of our clientele are successful small businesses that are at some level or other looking at what am I going to do when I leave my business someday and how do we get there. So we're going to start with one of the participants here kind of said, gee, the title looks a little different. Really the title I think was determining who can run the business. But I want to start with a little bit higher perspective, maybe the 10,000-foot perspective, and talk about kind of how do we get there. And so what we have here is we have a group of people that at one level or another have quite a bit of knowledge about ESOPs, and I think that's interesting. So we will have to, in my firm, we have developed a specialization in dealing with ESOPs, and so I think hopefully I'll be able to add some value to that. Well, let's start from the big picture here. If we go to the second slide here, which I'm going to click on in just a second here, see if that works. If you look at from a business owner worldview perspective, we talk about BC, before cashing out, and AD, after the deal. So for those of you that are not 100% employee-owned, which are a couple there, before you cash your business out or before you decide how you're going to exit your company, the big picture is often clouded because time is very limited. Money is often tied up. We would estimate that 70, sometimes 80% of the net worth of an entrepreneur is tied up in bricks and mortar, in the company or in real estate. And the purpose of someone's life is often very much aligned with or tied to their business. So really, exit planning, which is really a part of just dealing with developing a strategy for developing your management and leadership, really is how do you run your business today so that at some point you can leave it in style, in control, and on purpose, as opposed to what often happens, unfortunately, a person having to leave their company reactively because something happened. A partner died or something, and Susan has several partners. One of the partners comes in and says, I've made a decision, I don't want to do this anymore. And you thought that they were on board for the next 5 years, and pretty soon you're dealing with a 12-month plan. So after the deal, after there's some kind of plan in place, things are different. For the owner that has created some liquidity, whether it's through an ESOP, an outside sale, or some kind of inside sale, you now have more time. You have more liquidity, hopefully, if the transaction is successful. That's the goal. And now you're sometimes looking at what will I do with the rest of my life now that I have more time and more money. And so one of the problems we find on that side of the fence is really how do you align the wealth that you've been able to create through private enterprise to the purpose of your life. And for many business owners, that's a scary thought. So one of the biggest problems just in overall planning is actually getting started. And so if you kind of look, again, I'm appealing now to those that haven't completely gotten out of business and are considering the things that they might have to consider. One of the biggest reasons why people procrastinate is what we call 4 a.m. fears. And what we find is with very, very successful entrepreneurial families and entrepreneurs, no matter how large their estate or how big their company, we have found that there's very commonly 4 fears. And the first fear would be fear of conflict. And oftentimes that fear of conflict is not just between, the owner and their employees, although that could be a fear or a concern, but it's oftentimes family-oriented conflict, the fear of, gee, if we have to talk about what we're going to do with our company and selling perhaps, that gets me into a conversation with my wife or my husband about what what we're going to do, for the rest of our life if I sell the business. So concerns about money surrounding children and how much wealth is enough and so forth. So that fear of conflict is often a stumbling block, and without clarity about those things, oftentimes the planning process doesn't move forward. Another fear would be losing control, and I think ESOPs are a very interesting hybrid in succession planning because they do allow an owner, they offer the opportunity to maintain the status quo to some degree. Dave, for example, you've done an ESOP. That probably has allowed the company to remain private, although in a different format. And so you retain the ability to control your destiny, as opposed to when you sell your company, if you sell to an outsider, you may lose certain control over what the new buyer and new owner would do with your company and with your employees. And the other two, loss of influence, fear of loss of influence, and ultimately fear of failure. And for many successful entrepreneurs, the idea that the most important transaction of their life, which could be the transaction that involves the transition or the sale of their business, the fear of that not working out well is sometimes so large that we can often just simply say, well, maybe we'll take care of that next year. So if you take a look at the next slide here, we've identified that there's basically 7 steps to any real successful exit strategy, and I'll just give them in summary, and then we're only going to drill down on a couple here that are appropriate to the topic, but hopefully you'll see that good planning really, in our view, should be holistic. If you just start with one narrowly focused portion of this, you can sometimes end up in the wrong place. So step 1 would be, obviously, seems very obvious, identifying the objectives. Where is it that the owner or the ownership team wants to be down the road? And oftentimes we find a startling lack of clarity about what that really looks like. And quantifying the business value and the personal financial resources. We'll get into that a little bit more, but that really deals with, if we don't know where we are and we don't know what we own, which would include, of course, what is the value of our business, it's very difficult to make decisions that are long-term that involve the ultimate sale or redistribution of that. And so even in the personal side of the equation, having a lack of clarity about just how much money you would need to actually live for the rest of your life without having to worry about money. And where will that money come from? Typically, it comes from the business in some form. And we're going to talk about then in step 3 a little bit. This is where we'll drill down, maximizing and protecting business value. What are the value drivers? And in this case today, focusing in primarily on the value drivers that involve the building of and the creation of a successful management team. And then the 2 different alternatives, basically, sales to third parties, okay, which would be an outside sale, and then step 5 would be sales or ownership transfers to insiders, which would be an inside sale. But without some plan of business continuity, in other words, typically, whether it's an ESOP or another kind of strategy, you don't push a button and have it all completed in a month or even sometimes 6 months. So during the period of time that you're going through a planning process to develop a strategy and implement it, you want to be sure that there's basically a contingency plan in place that protects the families involved and the ownership of the families involved, and protects the estates involved if there's still outside ownership, and of course protects the business itself and the value of the business, which may be tightly and closely aligned to the management team itself. How do you make sure that when you walk out the door someday, that the key management team doesn't walk out closely behind you? And then step 7, which we won't have focus today, is how does all of this integrate with your personal wealth and estate planning? In most entrepreneurs' situation, their personal and their business wealth is really attached, kind of like a pair of trousers. The right pocket would be your business wealth, the left pocket is your personal wealth, and they're all kind of connected together. One impacts the other. Let's see here, my bottom, Chris, my slide Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Richard. It's not moving?
The little thing on the bottom isn't there to move the slides. I don't know what happened. It just disappeared. Where's the little thing on the bottom?
It might be underneath a chat window, perhaps, or some other window.
I don't know. All right, I'll just tell you when to move it if you don't mind. Okay, the next screen really just talks about if you're looking at, again, from the owner's perspective, what are the common objectives that need to be identified. Universally, how much longer do you want to work in the business before retiring or moving on? The average answer to that question that entrepreneurs will say is, guess what? 5 years. It's always 5 years. So next year, it'll be 5 years. And so what we have is kind of what we call the rolling 5-year plan. And so what we want to really try to do is break through and set some accountability standards for, why does it continue to be 5 years? What is the reason for that? And it's typically there's just a lack of clarity about what it is you want to do. The next point is, what after-tax income do you need or want in retirement? And without having a clarity on that, it's very difficult to make decisions. You want to shift back again? You jumped ahead. Okay. And then to whom do you want to transfer the business? The family, co-owners, key employees, outside party, or ESOP? Obviously, several of the participants here today have selected ESOP, but a couple have not done that, so we want to focus in on trying to address both of those. If you go to the next slide, please. The other objectives that are typically common in any kind of exit planning would be, do we want to shift wealth to our children, providing charitable gifts or transfers as part of that? And then key, do we need or want to reward key employees? Is there some necessity to do that or a desire to do that? And then how do we get the full value of the business? Sometimes ESOPs are painted as an exit plan that does not give the owner full value for their business. In some cases that could be true, in some cases it's not true. So what is important is how much do you need and what do you want, and then maybe the goal is to take the business to the next level. If you hit the next slide here. So we talked a little bit about assessing your options, and there's basically, in my view, two. Let's see here. How do we get through my slides here? Are not in the right order for some reason. Okay. Would you skip to the next slide here? Well, having a little problem here. Chris?
Sir.
I think we got a problem with the slides, so I'm going to just have to, I apologize to the attendees here. So just avoid the slides here because they're not in the right order for some reason. So let's just talk about assessing your talents. So just don't look at the slides. I apologize about that. First of all, in my opinion, we have a lack of clarity oftentimes in identifying leaders versus managers. In many companies, I think there's a confusion about leadership succession, ownership succession, and management succession. One of the key things in assessing your talent, whether you're 50 employees or 100 employees, would be to make a short list of who do you think your managers are, and what is a manager, and who are your leaders. And we're sort of a simple task that might be helpful in doing that yourselves would be, leaders are people who ask questions, who are insightful in asking, and managers are people who are skilled at telling people what to do. And although it's a very simplistic explanation, I do think that that's a litmus test. I think most owners have some idea of who their leaders and managers are, but I would say off of a short session like this, just take a piece of paper and write down, just when you think about who's the best leader, if you had to pick a person today, if you got hit by the bus, okay, and this is for the consulting firm that has 3 owners, for example, you got hit by the bus today, if you had to pick one person that can lead the company, who would that person be? And just write that person's name down. Each one of you just write one name down. You have to pick one person. One of the biggest mistakes I see in private companies is the desire to have groups of people lead and own and manage the company. In my opinion, again, just as someone that's worked with a lot of businesses, is that you need to make the tough decision. Even in family businesses, there might be a brother and a sister. We have a case right now we're working on. It's a small construction-oriented type of business, and the father wants to transition the company to his son and his daughter, who don't get along that well. And we've encouraged him to make a decision, which he did. And even though his son is not ready today to really run the company, their best chance for survival and success would be with his son, not his daughter. And so I think that that is an important decision to make. Yeah, go to the next slide there, since you were able to find that particular slide. There we go. Okay, we're back on track. Okay. Top grading is another simple exercise. Again, most of you are probably way smarter than me and have done most of these things, but oftentimes we know what we should do, but we don't do it. So here's a very simple exercise I would encourage you to consider doing. Think about your group of people and put them into basically 4 categories. Let's start on the bottom. C players. C players are those people that, for some reason or other, they're working for you, somebody hired them, they really don't perform up to a top level. You really probably need to get rid of the C players, but there's some reason why you haven't stepped to the plate to do that. C players are the kind of employees that really drag down everyone else, and they should be ruthlessly cut. Now, B players are the hardest ones because they're actually showing up and doing an adequate job. But B players, when you really look at them, have no potential to be A players. And most management books that I read and most of the things that I see would say that we should be disciplined in only hiring and retaining A players. The problem is we all have a few Bs and Cs on our team. The real challenge, I think, is the B players that have A potential. In other words, with some additional training, with some additional encouragement, some additional time, the B players that have A potential really should be kept. So if you just go down your list of employees, you have small enough firms, and put people into a category. Are they A players? Are they Bs with A potential? Are they Bs or Cs? And really have a tough conversation with yourself and maybe your management team to say, what should we do with the Bs and Cs? And that's a very simple exercise that I highly recommend. It can be kind of painful, however. The next slide really talks about some testing tools. I'm going to open up for just a question here and ask the group to respond. How many of you have used any kind of assessing or testing tools with employees?
We have at J.H. Bennett.
And what tools have you used, or tool?
I think currently we're using something called Profiles.
Okay. And how has that worked?
It's just one out of several things to assess people.
Okay.
I don't think it's ever perfect, but gives us an idea.
Okay. Anyone else in the room that's used a testing tool with employees as far as part of the hiring process or the management development process? Okay. Well, either you're embarrassed to tell us that they haven't worked. I will share 3 that I think are very useful. We have used all 3 of these. The one on the bottom, called the Wonderlic test, has been in business and around for dozens of years, I think 20, 30 years. It's actually what the NFL uses to assess quarterbacks. And in the history of using that test, Michael Vick was the only quarterback that they actually hired that failed the test. So that might tell us something. But actually, it's an intelligence test. It's a time test, and it truly is a test where the person just tries to answer as many questions as quickly as possible, and basically it comes back with a numerical score. The score will tell you whether somebody has the raw intelligence and ability. This is more of an IQ-oriented type of assessment. The worst thing you can do is put somebody in a role that they're just simply not wired for. I mean, we all are born with a certain amount of innate intelligence, and if you put somebody in a role that they can't be successful at, that is a recipe for failure. I'm an optimist. I'm also someone in a marketing side of our business, so I always look at people and assume that they can achieve more than they probably can. That's a huge mistake that most entrepreneurs make, and I've made it over and over. So I'm starting to get a little smarter, but this assessment is a good clue to whether or not somebody is actually smart enough to do the job that you're actually hiring them to do. The next one that I want to talk about is called Kolbe, and Kathy Kolbe is the founder of this organization. And for any of these things, what I would encourage you is to just, if you have questions on it, please send me an email, and I'll send you some information on either of these or anything we've talked about. My email was on the first slide. I'll give it to you again. It's rtanner@ownershipadvisors, that's all one word, .com. Now, the Kolbe assessment really is, these are assessments that can be done online. They can be done in less than 15 minutes. The outputs give an assessment that tells how somebody is wired, how they're hardwired to take action. And for example, one of the things that Kolbe assesses is whether somebody has a high fact-finding orientation. So on a 1 to 10 scale, for example, my Kolbe score, I rate a 6, which means that for me to be successful in working in a group or working as part of a team, I need to gather a reasonably large amount of information in order to make decisions. If somebody had a 3, for example, on the fact-finding score, they would almost be irritated by someone like me because I would ask and I would need a lot of information. Someone that has a very low fact-finder score can sometimes be intimidated by somebody that has a high fact-finding score. So just by understanding that these two differences aren't things that we can control, they're the way we were hardwired from birth, it goes a long way to developing more successful teams. The second thing that Kolbe also attests is our follow-through abilities. I'm sad to announce that my follow-through skills are 3 on the 10 scale, which means that if I don't surround myself with people that have strong follow-through capabilities, I will have great ideas but lack the ability to make them happen. And so you can assess a group, a management team, 2, 3, or 5 people to determine, do you have an adequate balance between people that have ideas, which would be the next category the Kolbe assessment assesses, which would be sort of the quick start, as they call it. Quick start is really your ability to manage and deal with change, and most entrepreneurs are off the scale on the quick start. So, for example, I score an 8, which means it's my dominant characteristic. So, for example, if you have a team of low quick starts, people who are 1 to 3 on that scale, they will resist change. So if I go to a seminar and I come back and say, I learned all about ESOPs, this is the most terrific thing on the planet, and I present that to a group of people who are low on the quick start scale, they will find every reason why that's maybe not something that we need or want to do. So if you have a team that's out of balance, or the other way around, you have 5 people that are all quick starts, they'll all have great ideas, and nobody will be in the room to really follow through and implement those. So this Kolbe assessment is very helpful individually, but it's really designed to be something that you can use with groups. And they have assessments that can rate where you have strengths and weaknesses in your group. And if you're hiring a manager for the fellow that's looking to bring in a president or just a key employee, it would be good that you have that leader, that new person, balance the energy of the management team, or just being aware. And then the DISC is another assessment tool we use that doesn't really talk so much about how you are hardwired or deal with someone's intelligence or aptitude. It deals with more of the personality, and they have some very good reports that deal with how people communicate and their preferred communication style. So these 3 tools together are inexpensive, and in my opinion, we're crazy as business people to not use these tools. You don't rely on them entirely because at the end of the day, people are a lot more complicated than these tools, but I strongly endorse these tools. If we click to the next slide here, ownership transfers to insiders. That's kind of what we're talking about here in a sense if you haven't done a complete ESOP here. So you're looking at why would we want to do that? Well, one, that if you're looking at selling to a key employee group for the benefit of the owner, it helps to retain those key employees. So having a good plan in place and communicating that plan. So often I have found that the owner or the management team doesn't effectively communicate their strategy. Even if that strategy isn't completed, simply having a meeting with your employees to let them know that we have engaged a firm, for example, or we are in a process of developing a plan of succession, or we are looking at ways to do this. Just letting them know that, yes, you're doing something rather than nothing. They are guessing about what you're doing or not doing, and that creates a lot of dissonance in their mind because they know that if something happens to one or more of the key employees in small companies, that could have a significant impact on their job. Let's talk a little bit about business continuity planning, and that would be step number 6 here, if you jump in there. And the idea here is what can you do to plan to make sure that the business continues when you don't? If one or more of the key employees or managers or the owner, him or herself, were to die or become sick or disabled, what are some of the things that are important to that? If you go to the next slide there, Chris, I think there's a couple points that I want to talk about. At the bottom, we talk about a shareholder agreement. Sometimes it's called a business will, or sometimes it's called a buy-sell agreement. This is a very, very important document that all businesses should have. Even in the case of an employee-owned company, if you still have outside owners, and several of you do, there needs to be an agreement between the owners as to what will happen in the event of the 4 Ds: death, disability, or departure, or dissolution. And so let's talk about that. Typically, these agreements are tied into the value of the business. Now, if you're employee-owned, one of the benefits there is you're getting the stock appraised each year, which is a requirement. If you're not employee-owned, for Susan, the company that's in consulting, one of the difficulties here is coming up with an agreed-upon methodology to determine the value of the business. This is very important because if during the time that you're figuring out what exactly you want to do to develop that management team and ultimately to move that plan ahead, how is that what's going to happen if one of you gets sick or dies? So the buy-sell agreement should be very clear in determining how or what methodology will the value of the company be determined. We recommend that agreements should be specific, that in the event of a death or a departure or a dissolution, that an outside appraisal you agree to go actually to an outside appraisal firm rather than using a formula approach to that agreement. The other problem that we often find is that if a value is not being done on a regular basis, the agreement might, fix the value at, let's say, $5 million, but down the road, the value has grown, and so there could be a lack of clarity there. Now, one of the contingency plans that should be considered is what happens if one of the shareholders were to die. Now, whether you're employee-owned or not, a company can purchase life insurance on a key employee or an owner, and that insurance can be there to protect the business. This is the contingency planning portion here. That insurance proceeds can come into the company at a point in time when there might be some liquidity needs in the company or some liabilities that might be better off paid off. So one form of insurance owned by the company would be key man insurance, or key woman insurance, key person insurance, where the company owns a policy on one or more of the executives, key employees, or the owners for the purpose of replacing that individual over a period of 12 months to 24 months. Another use of insurance in contingency planning would be to fund the buy-sell agreement. And so that can be done where an insurance policy might be owned by the company, which would be there to fund a stock redemption, or it might be where the shareholders themselves utilize a trust, or they just each purchase a policy on one another. In the case of two or more owners, it's usually done through a trust. And basically the idea is that if your business partner dies, you don't want to be in business with their spouse, and so you can have an agreement that has a put right back to the company, similar to the ESOP repurchase obligation, which is a put right back to the company. And that kind of opens up another issue with regards to where insurance sometimes is used as a funding vehicle for ESOP companies, and that would be to protect in the event of the death or or departure of an employee where the company is required to buy back the stock. Now let's key into another area of continuity planning, which I think is important and ties into our topic probably pretty well, and that is something that we call a stay bonus. One of the difficulties, especially I think in employee-owned firms, is we get into ESOPs oftentimes with a somewhat egalitarian viewpoint. We want to sell the idea of employee ownership as a great benefit, and oftentimes we don't want to select out an individual and say, gee, they should be treated differently. So the whole ESOP concept, because it's an ERISA-based plan, forces us by law to treat everyone equally, and that has some real benefits. One of the disadvantages, an ESOP or a 401k or any qualified plan cannot treat individuals who might have very different talents and skills differently. So what do we do about that? Well, there's a whole area of planning that's tied into something called the non-qualified plan. A qualified plan is one that's blessed by ERISA and gives deductibility on the front end to the company, and once the money goes into that plan, it becomes segregated and protected, and the company has no ability to access that. A non-qualified plan is very much the opposite of that, and one of the important aspects of developing a leadership and management plan for the succession of your company is how do you lock your best people in a positive way. And I'll give you an example of one that we're working on with a 50-person roofing company that has a key employee who's been with the company for 15 years. He's age 40. And when we interviewed him, he confidentially said to me that, I really have a great deal of faith and trust in the owner of the company and the founder, and I know that he's planning to bring his son in to run the company, but I don't have the same level of confidence or trust, and I may in the future, but right now I don't, and so I'm concerned. And so one of the things we talked about with the owner was to set up something that we're calling a stay bonus. So we want to create an incentive that if the owner, while they're planning for the exit from the company, were to die or leave, let's say in this case die, there would be an incentive for this key employee, this 40-year-old key employee, to stay with the company for 12 to 24 months. And that incentive is there to basically give the heir apparent, in this case the son, opportunity to demonstrate his capability to run and manage the company. So at the end of the 24-month period, there would be a financial payment made to this key employee that would be 100% of his salary for the 2-year period. So he's making $100,000, so it would be a $200,000 incentive. Pretty attractive. So you might be asking, well, where does that money come from? Well, in this case, the owner was already insurable, and they were using some insurance for another purpose, a deferred compensation plan. So adding another $200,000 of death benefit was very, very inexpensive. What it did is it sent a message to this employee that, I will stick around for 2 years and give the next management team, a shot, and at the end of 2 years, they're free to walk. So that's the short-term side of a stay bonus. Long-term, the goal really is to not only retain that individual for 2 years, but to retain them for a minimum, in this case, of 15 years. So a non-qualified plan can be structured with the company agreeing to set aside a reserve on the balance sheet for a plan that would be available to this particular executive or key employee, provided that they continue working on a favorable basis for the next 15 years. And in this case, if the company were to set aside $25,000 a year for the next 15 years, they would be able to fully fund a long-term stay bonus, basically a non-qualified plan of a salary continuation form for 10 years, starting in year 16. The company could be paying that individual $100,000 a year, which would be tax deductible at that point to the company and taxable income to the executive. In other words, he can go home to his spouse and say, you know, I've just been offered $1 million promise, and the company only has to come up with $25,000 a year, which they own and control entirely. So that's one very simple but I think effective way where you can create handcuffs that are positive, affordable to a company, that allow you to lock in your key people. Why is this so important? Well, it's important not just to be able to offer a promise, and the ability to customize that promise, but it's really critically important to have those conversations with those individuals who you may think are your key leaders and managers. Just sitting down and having the conversation, which oftentimes doesn't occur, and having, just being able to find out this individual's concerns about leadership and management, and the fact that he was very happy at the company, but had these concerns about the next leader, really opened up the opportunity then to design something that was specific for this individual. When we started the process, both the owner and the individual thought that what they wanted was ownership, stock ownership. When the executive understood, when the manager understood that, stock ownership in a private company that has no market isn't really as good as this plan of a non-qualified nature that was being offered. That really opened both the owner's eyes, because in this case, spreading stock ownership to non-family members was not something that they wanted to do, and their attorney and accountant both agreed that that wasn't a good thing to do. So I think that those are important conversations that this kind of process of evaluation, first of all, kind of wrapping up a little bit here, having some form of assessment of your talent. Who are the leaders in your firm and who are the managers? Now, we didn't really talk about training. How many of you, I'm going to ask the question, have utilized any kind of training, management or leadership training? Anybody want to chime in?
Not much from J.H. Bennett.
Okay. Anybody else have sent any employee to any kind of leadership or management training?
From Tim McCunis, very, very, very little. A little
Okay.
continuing education. That's about it.
Well, I would just encourage you all to think about, your business is the most important asset. It is the goose that's laying the golden eggs, and your people are the most important assets of that most important asset. And so by not choosing to invest in those people, by not investing in training, you're all missing a very, very important thing. I'll share one training program that I think is very good. There's many of them out there, but Dale Carnegie, which is proven the test of time, has a very good personal development program, which is they use public speaking as their platform for personal development. It's much more than a public speaking class. I recommend that. I've seen transformation of people that we've sent through. The second is Dale Carnegie also has a leadership training program, which, the content itself is so robust and so powerful that for the price of it, you really can't go wrong. It's just very, very well. And here in Cleveland, they have they have some excellent instructors. But Dale Carnegie is a national organization, and I would encourage any of you to seek them out. And it's again stood the test of time. A lot of the principles that Dale Carnegie created are over the past 100 years literally have simply been repackaged and redistributed in so many different formats. But the core material is excellent. So I really challenge you all to, first of all, ask yourself, well, why wouldn't we be sending our most important assets to training in some way to develop leadership and management? And one of the things they really talk about is that, if you're hiring the right people, you don't need a lot of management. The idea is really you want people that can manage systems and processes, not people. If you have to manage your people, you probably have the wrong people. So you want to you want to have a good system of bringing people into your organization that understand that the real job is to manage systems and processes and develop systems and processes that are repeatable, and that if you have to babysit or manage people, then you might have the wrong people on the bus. One great book for you those of you that have smaller companies that I highly recommend is something called The E-Myth. That's the E, capital E, Myth, written by Michael Gerber. It's basically, the subtitle is Why Most Small Businesses Don't Work and What to Do About It. I think that's an excellent book. For any of you that are kind of in the consulting, I think there's one consultant in there, and the firm that's also not an ESOP, there's a great book that you might want to purchase. It's called Hats Off to You. And that is basically subtitled Balancing Roles and Creating Success in Family Business. Now, family business is the same as, three partners. It's if it's not a public or an ESOP. So that is written by Ernest Dowd, D-O-U-D, and Lee Hausner. They're an interesting group, a consulting firm and a psychologist that banded together. One of the best books, I think, on just dealing with ownership, management, succession issues for private companies.
Richard?
Yeah.
I just got a question. Could you repeat the title of the book by Michael Gerber?
Michael Gerber is called The E-Myth Revisited, actually. This must be the second version of it. It's usually just referred to as the E-Myth, E with a great big E. And basically, I'll read, Michael Gerber is the founder and chairman of E-Myth Worldwide, where he originated his own unique form of small business re-engineering processes on behalf of his more than 25,000 small business clients. He basically, dispels the myths surrounding starting your own business and shows how commonplace assumptions can get. Anyway, he talks about how people often get into business for the love of, something that, like a dentist gets into business because they love being a dentist, and then they find out that really to be successful in that business, they have to sell, manage people, and become a business person, and pretty soon they're not doing what they really love any longer. And so it's all about development of systems and processes so that you can really do that which you're most gifted and able to do. Going back, tying that into the Kolbe assessment, Kolbe's whole focus is really around this concept called unique ability. So if your employees or your key people are not functioning in what their unique ability really is, it sort of goes back to the Jim Collins thing, good to great. If you've got to get the right people on the bus, okay, and you need to get the right seats on the bus. So many times we have people doing jobs that really are not what give them energy and really what give them meaning in their life. And frankly, this was a hard lesson for me to learn, and I still relearn. We need to be as leaders, and leaders need to identify the unique abilities of our employees and help them to either succeed in our company in their unique ability or succeed in getting them somewhere else where they can be successful. That is the most important thing. Trying to change those people into something is like having my golden retriever Tobin at home, turning him into a Doberman. I can really work very hard at sending him to training classes, but he will never be a Doberman. And that is probably one of the biggest mistakes that certainly people that are in the marketing side or that have a sales orientation and many leaders just simply fail to realize that you can't turn somebody into something that they're not wired to do. So the Kolbe assessment is very, very good at helping to identify what is the real motivators of people. The next slide here is actually, again, leadership, I think, is so critical in identifying and trying to look at leaders. I look at here for the fellow that's looking at bringing a leader into your business. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I think there are 4 real identifiers of great leaders. Great leaders really have the ability to turn their business into a cause. In other words, their business is not just about making money, employing people, filling up inventory or selling something. It's their business has become a cause. And I think there are many employee-owned companies that have potential to use the employee-owned structure as a mechanism to do this. However, I think sometimes just being employee-owned is not a cause, and we should really be thinking about that. Great leaders have the ability to let go. And obviously, for those of you that have done a 100% ESOP, somebody along the line let go. Great leaders are able to get their people to think like owners. So just because, now Dave, let me ask you this at J.H. Bennett. You've done an ESOP. Does everyone there think like an owner?
Not everyone, but that is one of our goals.
That's a great goal.
It's difficult.
And so you just because you push the button and they get a stock certificate at the end of the year doesn't necessarily mean that they think and act like an owner. And the fact of the matter is you don't have to be employee-owned to get your people to think and act like owners. There's not any connection at all to those two things. However, if you already are employee-owned, you do have an advantage because you actually have a piece of paper that says you actually are an owner. But the real challenge, again, is training, education, to get people to understand, well, how does my job, how does my role, how does what I do on a daily basis actually impact the profitability of the company? If someone can't answer that, if they don't understand that, how do you expect them to think and act like an owner? I know the answer to that because I'm an owner. And then finally, great leaders really are stewards. Now, this is a word that sometimes gets confused with religious giving. Stewards are really individuals that look at their business as something more than just a bunch of people that are creating revenue for the ownership. A stewardship mentality of your business is that the business has a higher and greater purpose, and as a result, we have responsibility to care for that. And I think that is something also that an employee ownership culture over years can develop. Some of the most successful employee-owned firms really are great stewards of their culture. They're great stewards of what the business stands for, and they exemplify all of these things. But I don't want to overemphasize or oversell the ESOP idea, because there's only 11,000 ESOPs in the entire country, roughly that. So obviously, the vast majority of businesses don't use an ESOP to develop their succession plans. The last slide, I think, again, a little bit ties to more the succession. I had assumed we would have more people that didn't have ESOPs, but I like this slide, so I'm going to just share it with you. But there are really, several kinds of former owners that you can be. I guess I'm speaking here to maybe Bill Clark and his partner. You can be a monarch and you can rule with an iron fist until you're forced out by death or palace revolt. This, I think, I got out of the Hats Off to You book. The general, a little better, leaves under pressure. Once gone, stays close enough, and he's really kind of looking for the successor to make a mistake so that he can come back in and save the day. The governor, basically once they leave, they take all the knowledge and skill with them. And that's where that E-Myth book really is so helpful, because it's all about capturing through systems and processes the collective knowledge and skill of your group, so that people aren't, looking at their job protecting their job security by the knowledge that they have. The ability to have a system allows freedom so that an employee can actually take a week off and not worry about their job going away, because someone else can actually help move that along. In other words, it's empowerment. Instead of looking at job security, sharing through training and systems and processes allows that employee to ultimately be empowered to take a position of higher responsibility. But the real goal is to strive for being an ambassador, which would be the plan has been carefully structured. There's plenty of notice. The ambassador, former CEO, stays close enough so they continue to make positive contributions. Just because you've sold to an ESOP doesn't necessarily mean that you will be an ESOP forever. There are many, many cases where ESOP companies become acquired by non-ESOP companies, and in those cases, they can actually be beneficial for all of the key stakeholders. There's other cases where the owner will stay on in some form of board capacity and still have the ability to be an ambassador, elder statesman, mentor, and move from sort of working in the business to a more elevated position of coach and mentor. And I see that as being a very positive way of working with exit planning, and especially in the case of ESOP situations. So that I think, what's our time frame here? Chris, have we used our hour up, or our 45 minutes?
Yeah, we're about right at the end.
Okay. What I'd like to do is basically conclude by saying the primary way that you can protect and maximize your business value is by building a solid management team and grooming a successor. So you can bring in all kinds of consultants and I'm sure you do this as well, that can help you better manage your systems and processes, your sales process, and how you manufacture what you deliver. But ultimately, when you go to market, when you're looking to have that appraisal done of your company and look at what's driving the value, one of the key value drivers that's going to, especially in this period of time now where we have a lot of economic uncertainty, the key value driver is going to be around whether or not there is a management team in place, and whether or not that management team is going to stay in place when you, as the owner, ultimately leave or depart the company somewhere down the line, that 5-year period. So that is really the focus here of this whole talk, was around tools that you could use to help identify who are the key players, ultimately use some assessment options, and then looking at having private conversations with those individuals to find out what is their plan. And you'll be surprised. They will be more candid with you than you think. And what do you have to do to create some kind of incentive, both short-term and long-term, to keep those players there, and then investing in some form of training, whether it's Dale Carnegie or others. So those are all just some of my thoughts. Let me stop and see if anybody in the group wants to either ask some questions or share some of their personal experiences.
Any questions? All right. Thank you, Richard. Excellent talk. I am currently going to be, I just sent everybody Richard's contact email again. If you have any questions, I'm sure Richard would love to talk to you. Happy to answer any questions you might have offline. I know sometimes the serious questions don't like to be asked in a public forum, so I encourage you to do that. I want to let you know that we will be doing 2 additional webinars this week. On Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, we will be doing financing ESOP transaction. And on Friday, we will be doing one on entity selection in your succession plan and in running your business. So if you're not signed up for any of those, get to sign up. Richard, did you have any last comments?
No, just like I said, obviously some of the questions you might have would be personal and you wouldn't want to share in our group. So we enjoy conversations. Send me an email. We can talk offline if any of you want. There's a lot more information than we can have on a few slides. So I appreciate your time, and I hope some of our comments were helpful.
Thank you very